Hey, you're back after the whole Saltine fiasco. Welcome back. Okay, I know what you're thinking. What's that digital camera doing floating aimlessly in front of me? Well, don't worry, I have a perfectly logical explanation. See, for the past month and a half, the only things I've thought about is digital camera and smartphone photography, and it's starting to manifest itself into the air around me. Hey, all I said was my explanation would be logical. I didn't say it would make sense.
These days, we take our phone cameras for granted. It's easy for anybody, photo fanatic or not, to pick up their phone, point, and shoot.
Personally, I use my phone's camera all the time. On vacation trips, walks through nature, even just to grab a picture of a sign or billboard I get a kick out of. Well, for a while these guys stuck around. Phone cameras are good enough now that most people, even some professionals, are slimming down to using just their phones for photography. But today I want to take a look at the app we all use to access our phone cameras, the aptly named Camera app. It's changed quite a bit over the years, and I always enjoy taking a look back at certain aspects of smartphones once in a while just to see how far we've come. Or regressed. Yeah, let me just get this out of the way. I think the modern smartphone camera app has some problems. As manufacturers have added more and more features to the thing, they haven't done a good job of making adjustments to the app to suit them. I wouldn't go as far as to say the modern smartphone camera app experience is bad, it's certainly tolerable, but as someone who uses their phone camera almost constantly, I wish things felt a little bit less clunky and slow.
In order to understand how we got to now, though, we're going to have to go back to the beginning. And as with most smartphone stuff, that means we have to start with the original iPhone. Yeah, I know, it's been over 10 years and tech YouTubers still won't shut up about this thing, but this guy really was massively influential in a ton of ways. Oh, and while I'm mentioning the iPhone, it's worth noting that I'm going to be sticking with the history of the iPhone camera app through this video, since it's the most influential one in my opinion. But a lot of this stuff is going to apply to most smartphones on the market, and I will be occasionally making a few references to Android stuff here and there. Before we can launch directly into the camera app, I want to preface all of this with a quick overview on some design stuff that plays an especially central role in the camera app. Back in the ancient times of 2007, Apple designed a lot of their software using a principle called skeuomorphism heavily. For those of you that don't know, skeuomorphism is basically the idea of designing computer apps and visuals off of real-world objects. So in early releases of iPhone OS, yes, it was called iPhone OS at the time, look it up, the Notes app looked like a notepad, the Voice Memos app looked like a microphone, the Contacts app looked like a contact book, Notification Center looked like a bulletin board, the iBooks app was a bookshelf, and the eBooks were books.
I could go on.
After a while, all this skeuomorphism started to be a bit much. With iOS 6, we were getting some new app designs that I remember going, okay, yeah, I guess it's cute that the Game Center app looks like a pool table and directions in the map app look like highway signs now, but
Those two examples of skeuomorphism are unnecessary and ugly. The whole point of skeuomorphism is to show users objects and symbols they already recognize to help them navigate their phones. How does the Game Center app looking like a pool table help me? It's just a little visual gimmick. If anything, it's confusing because I feel like I should be able to play 8-ball in here or something. But, despite what some minimalist zealots will tell you, there are some good uses to use skeuomorphism in modern design though. Take the Books app for example.
yeah, I guess technically there's no reason the app couldn't just have next and last page buttons or something, but listen.
I already know how to use a book. That's the one where you turn the page to go on to the next one. This took me years to comprehend. Don't change it on me now.
Swiping between pages like a real book just feels a lot more natural. Taking that away for the sake of being modern just isn't doing it for me. So, if skeuomorphism can be done both well and poorly, how was it handled with the camera app?
It's complicated.
When the iPhone camera app was first designed, it had what I can only describe as bucket loads of skeuomorphism built into it. In my opinion though, it all works here functionally. At the bottom of the screen there's a shutter button to take the photo, just like a real camera.
Come on, how else are you gonna do it?
Even the little skeuomorphic shutter animation has a purpose here. It's letting you know it needs to process the last image before you can take another one.
So yeah, I like this app. That said, it was obvious things couldn't stay this way forever. The inclusion of video recording was inevitable at some point.
Enter the iPhone 3GS, the first iPhone capable of recording video. Obviously, Apple needed to find a way to implement it into the camera app. They decided to keep things simple and added a switch to the right between the two modes. It worked fine for just the two of them, but as you probably know, modern smartphone cameras do a lot more now. Simply adding more stops to the little tiny switch wasn't going to be an option, so the setup was kind of doomed to be a temporary solution from the start. Apple really didn't want to let it go though, because the next update with any real changes to the app, iOS 5, they snuck in a panorama mode by hiding it behind an options menu. A lot of people at the time didn't even know it existed. That wasn't all Apple added with iOS 5 though. The app gained a somewhat minor feature called AE/AF lock that apparently some people consider to be a big deal. I didn't discover the feature until years later, and when I did, I remember being confused by it because I didn't know what it was or how to control it since it would just pop up on the screen at what felt like random times. Turns out AE stands for auto exposure and AF stands for autofocus. By holding down on a certain object in frame, you can make the camera app remember the focus and exposure settings for it, even after taking a photo of said object.
If you don't use AE/AF lock constantly, you're not a real smartphone camera user, and under Section FAK3 of smartphone law, you are obliged to throw your phone out the window immediately.
Taking inspiration from some third-party app manufacturers, Apple decided to add the option to use the volume rockers as shutter buttons in iOS 5, making things feel even more like the digital cameras of yesteryear.
iOS 5 added a surprising amount of utility to the camera app. Along with the iPhone 4S's pretty solid camera, I'd say this is around the time a lot of consumers started ditching their digital cameras to use just their phones. I can't wait to see what Apple did with the camera app on iOS 6. It's shiny now.
Okay, iOS 6 had more of a focus on other apps like Maps and Game Center, but with iOS 7 being a full system redesign, the company took the opportunity to finally address the long-standing issues with navigating between camera modes, building a new app from the ground up that had that magic feeling only Apple products can.
Just kidding, they screwed it up like they did with everything else in iOS 7.
For better or for worse, iOS 7 was the birth of the modern smartphone camera app. After years of Apple adding a few minor features to the app here and there, support for a front-facing camera and flash, tap to focus, a photo grid for nerds, the option to run photos through HDR post-processing, here Apple made some big changes. First, they decided to hide the camera grid option in settings where everyone could forget about it and replace its spot with live filter previews.
What? Why couldn't I just apply the filter later?
Of course, the changes to the camera app didn't stop there. No. See, Apple, while ditching skeuomorphism all over the place in iOS 7, decided to add it here. In what I can only assume is an attempt to be reminiscent of the dials on digital cameras for switching modes, the iOS 7 camera app set the standard for basically every iOS and Android camera app since by featuring this rotating dial of camera modes. iOS 7 had 4: photo, video, panorama, and one new arrival, the ever-popular square mode.
It takes photos in the shape of a square. That's it. If you were terrified of cropping your photos to a 1:1 aspect ratio, this is the mode for you, I guess.
iOS 7 also added burst mode, a feature that would rapidly shoot a ton of photos for as long as you were holding down the shutter. You could go back later and pick your favorites out.
If you can't tell, I'm a little underwhelmed with the new stuff here. Square, filter previews, these are both just editing features I could apply after taking the photo. Yeah, I guess burst mode would be nice if I ever actually remember to use it, but I don't.
It's hidden away, it doesn't have a dedicated mode like the others, out of sight, out of mind.
Regardless of the new stuff, the most important change with iOS 7 was definitely the new dial interface. With only 4 modes, I remember being confused at the time as to why they didn't just add 4 buttons in a row, but this was definitely a conscious decision by Apple to leave the app open to future editions. Sure enough, with iOS 8 the next year, they added 2 new modes, slow-mo and time-lapse, both of which are useful and a lot of fun.
Unrelated to the dial, Apple also added the ability to adjust the exposure for objects manually by tapping on them to focus and then dragging up or down on a slider. Nowadays, most phones are smart enough to pick the right exposure on their own, but at the time, I remember thinking this feature was really nice to have. Finally, iOS 8 introduced a timer feature to the app. That way you could do things like set up your phone on a stand and then run to get in the shot with the rest of your family while it counted down. Overall, the iOS 8 camera app was a pretty solid upgrade features-wise. It wasn't without its problems, though. See, now we had 6 modes on this bottom slider here. You can only see 4 at a time, so that meant when you open the app, putting you in photo mode, you can't see all of the options. It wasn't a huge deal, after all, time-lapse isn't exactly the most popular feature in the app, but photography can be really time-sensitive stuff, and any added steps in getting to the shutter is potentially time being wasted. I also can't help but feel that with this release, the app lost a lot of the simplicity that made it so easy to just pick up and use in the past. After the big changes in iOS 8, I was hoping they'd leave the camera alone for a year or two to help everyone adjust to all the massive changes that had been hitting it over the past 2 years. So, did they do that?
I mean, yeah, but not really.
One of iOS 9's flagship features was, without a doubt, Apple's brand new addition to the camera app, Live Photos.
When they first unveiled this on stage and made a big deal out of it, I thought it looked kinda dumb. It's a photo, but it captures audio and 1.5 seconds of what happened before and after you press the shutter. Wait a minute, that's just a 3-second video.
Then I actually got a chance to use it, and I have to say, nowadays this is honestly one of my favorite features of the iPhone camera. I leave it on almost all the time. I love the way just scrolling between photos in the library shows a little hint of what was happening. It makes the photos feel like they're living, almost like the moving photos in the Harry Potter books.
And as it turns out, I'm not the only one who thought the feature was a good idea. Samsung and Google both implemented versions of it dubbed motion photos later on, and both have better icons than whatever this is.
After iOS 9, Apple continued to steadily bring a few features to the camera app with each year. With iOS 10, they added dual lens support for the iPhone 7 Plus, and another one of my favorite features, portrait mode. iOS 11 added iPhone 10 support, and by support, I mean they just stuck the app on the phone and extended the black bars at the top and bottom of the screen. They also included the option to get to your photo filters by swiping up in the middle of the screen.
Okay.
Again with the photo filters. Now there are 2 ways to access them, and I wouldn't mind if there were 0. One notable thing they did add in the Photos app was the ability to change the keyframe of live photos and turn off the live part if you wanted to, making it just a photo. This essentially killed off any actual merit burst mode may have had, in my opinion. This was also around the time people started getting frustrated with the way Apple was handling video settings. It was 2017, and by now a lot of Android phones had started branching off from Apple and were letting users change frame rate and resolution from within their respective camera apps. Meanwhile, with iPhones you had to leave the camera app, go into settings, and navigate to the feature from there, then navigate back. Repeat the process when you wanted to change the settings back to their original state. It's as gross as it sounds.
I'll remind you that the iPhone X had plenty of room to include this feature since there was tons of black space everywhere not getting used.
Okay, but maybe things will shape up with iOS 12. After all, this was Apple's first year working with the new screen size. Maybe they just need a year to adjust. This year, Apple basically didn't even touch the camera app. They added a few more portrait modes, I guess, if you care about those, but in my opinion, none of them work very well, and I'd rather just stick with the normal one.
It makes sense there weren't many changes with this release. iOS 11 was kind of a buggy mess. They needed to take the year off and just fix the software issues. That brings us up to iOS 13, though. I'm sure after slacking off features-wise in iOS 12, they have big things planned. Maybe they'll finally fix the fundamental navigation issue caused by the dial.
They added one new portrait mode effect, high-key mono, to the camera app. That was it.
I'm high-key disappointed, if you know what I mean.
To be fair, they did add a lot of editing tools in the Photos app, which are cool, but yeah, after WWDC this year, it pretty much looked like Apple was going to leave the camera app alone completely.
Then their September keynote happened.
They unveiled the 2 new iPhones, the iPhone 11 and 11 Pro, both of which had a heavy focus on their cameras. Apple brought up that they had completely redesigned the camera app for them, and I got excited. Then Phil explained what he actually meant by redesign.
There's a new font in it called SF Camera. It is so pro, you're going to love using it.
This was not what needed fixing, Phil. This wasn't it. Okay, great. So now Apple's left us with 2 distinctly different camera apps, even though, apart from a few exclusive features on the new iPhones, they serve the exact same purpose.
Fine, I guess we should talk about what this new camera app brings to the table. Right off the bat, it doesn't solve the original app's fundamental issue, the slider along the bottom, which is disappointing, but there are a few things here I do like. Namely this preview the app gives beyond the frame. It's a cool way to minimize the lame black space at the top and bottom of the app. That said, in video mode, the full screen vibes are a bit much. Here's a background I chose for the interface with a lot of contrast, and you can see that it's not easy to see what any of this text says. In an updated version of the app that came out with iOS 13.1, Apple included the option to change video settings from within the app, so that's one point for it.
Except that there's no reason they couldn't have also brought it over to the older iPhones. I mean, except as a ploy to get people to buy the new ones. Although I do very much enjoy picturing the situation in which someone is like, you know, the new iPhones are good, but I'm just not sold on them yet. Well, you can change video modes in the camera app now. This changes everything. I'll take your whole stock.
There's one other cool feature here, but I actually didn't find out about it until Apple decided to port it over in the 2020 iPhone SE.
But wait, the iPhone SE has the old camera app, so now we're porting features from the new app back into the old one, but only on the budget $400. What? Apple, is this some kind of sick game to you?
Anyway, petty money grubbing aside, the feature is called Quick Take. What it does is pretty neat. If you've ever accidentally held down the camera button trying to take a video and accidentally triggered burst mode, Quick Take is your bud. Now when you hold down the shutter in photo mode, it starts recording a video instead. To be able to keep taking the video without holding down the shutter, swipe over to the right. If what you really wanted was burst mode,
because isn't that what we all really want in the end?
You can swipe to the left to retroactively convert all of the video frames into burst shots, and hold to keep on bursting. This is cool for a couple of reasons. First, I feel like a lot of people try to hold down the shutter button to take video, and it's nice that Apple is finally addressing that's usually what people want, while also not completely screwing over anybody who actually does still want to use burst mode. Second, the idea of swiping while holding down the shutter is pretty novel, and it's neat to be able to use it as a way to switch modes. If I had one complaint, it would probably be that if you use the volume buttons, you're forced to keep holding them since there's no way to swipe up there. I'd also complain there's no way to get to burst mode from the volume buttons, you know, if that were an issue. What else is good here? They removed Square from the list of modes on the slider. It's not gone, they just moved it to another part of the app. And unfortunately, the part of the app they moved it to is my least favorite addition. Now, at the top of the screen, there's a toggle you have to press to get to options for things like live photos and timer. It's an extra step to avoid putting buttons on a part of the app that was essentially completely empty to begin with. And the new stuff Apple has thrown in here to justify the menu is, in my opinion, pretty underwhelming. Now, in addition to Square, you can choose from two more aspect ratios, 4:3 and 16:9.
Those are fine, I guess. What else did they add?
Night mode.
Wait, isn't there already a toggle for that outside of this menu?
Yep.
There's nothing else, is there?
Nope. No clue what they were thinking with this one. I guess maybe it makes the app look simpler to a casual observer?
That's kind of overrated. Okay, well, by this point, I think it's clear that while phone companies are still adding some cool new features, no one at Apple or any of the other hundreds of Android manufacturers is actually interested in fixing the way the app operates. So I guess I'm gonna have to do it.
Alright, so how do you go about building an app that takes the best parts of what people already like about the camera app, throws out the garbage, and is still easy to pick up and use for a first-time user?
First, let's start with a new way to navigate between camera modes. No more clunky skeuomorphic slider. How about we have two tabs, one for photo modes and one for video modes, each with their own distinctive color. That way you always know where to find everything, and you're never more than 2 taps away from the shutter button on any given mode.
Next, you may have noticed that I've made the controls on what looks like a giant switch. That wasn't an accident. While each tab will default to your standard photo and video capture modes, as long as you're holding down on the shutter, you can slide left or right like with QuickTake to choose one of the other modes in case you hit the wrong one by mistake. Speaking of QuickTake, I've made a slight variation of it here. From the camera mode, you can hold down on the shutter to instantly switch tabs and start recording video. I think the extra step of sliding over to lock the video is just unnecessary. Skipping this also means you can now use QuickTake using the volume buttons. To get to burst mode,
look at me, I'm appeasing everyone now.
Double tap on the shutter in photo mode really quickly. This will cause the app to take burst shots until you tap the shutter again, or close the app, I guess. Since we're not swiping anymore, you can get to this functionality from the volume buttons as well. Okay, I think this setup is pretty solid. Next, let's add some controls. Like I mentioned earlier, with photo capture, timing can be essential, so it's important to make sure users can get to all this stuff quickly. For that reason, I think it's probably best to place the controls at the bottom, right above our mode options where people's fingers are already going to be. Just for the heck of it, I'll also throw in the photo grid option Apple has kept tucked away in settings for ages. At the top we'll include the leftovers, stuff you need to access less often or quickly but is still good to have in the app. For both modes I've included options on quality. For video that means resolution and frame rate. For camera that means resolution and whether or not you want to capture using Apple's special HDR post-processing. Surprisingly, right now you can't change photo resolution anywhere in iOS, so I guess this is technically new ground here. To the left, I've added the preview of the photo you just took, and to the right of it, I included something new. It's a little menu with some quick options to interact with in case you want to share the photo right away, or took it by accident and want to delete it.
And yeah, I think we've pretty much done it here. Do I think this is the perfect solution? Probably not. If smartphones get morph modes in the future, it would be difficult to work them into this layout. Overall, though, I'd much prefer this design. But be sure to let me know what you thought of it in the comments. Oh, sorry, that's the end. That's the end, I should have clarified.